The Master Instrument Record screen is accessed by clicking the button labeled Instruments on the left side of the screen. This is where you will enter all of the instrument's information that will remain constant, such as the model number, serial number, and calibration spec points. This screen is used to add, display, modify, and if necessary, delete instrument records from ProCal V5. This is the General Info tab. The fields on this tab allow you to enter general information about the instrument. The Manufacturer field allows you to select a manufacturer from the drop-down list or select New to enter a new manufacturer. The model number and serial number fields accept alphanumeric text. In the Status field, you may select a status from the list or select New to enter a new status. The Status Modification Date field is updated whenever the status is updated either through this screen or through a calibration event. In the Department field, you may select a department from the list or select New to enter a new department. In the Classification field, you may select a classification from the list. In the Equipment ID field, you may select an equipment ID from the list to associate with the instrument record. In the Instrument Type field, you may select an instrument type from the list or select New to create a new instrument type. Instrument types are useful in limiting the number of test instruments that can be selected for calibrations. In the Document field, a document ID may be selected from the list. If a document is selected, its Procedure tab and/or linked file will be available for technicians to view when entering calibrations. The Calibration Frequency section is where you will determine the interval in which the item is to be serviced. In the Calibration Frequency field, a calibration frequency may be selected from the list. This frequency, in conjunction with the Last Cal Date field, will affect any reminders that deal with the calibration due dates for the selected instrument and will determine if the instrument ID will be available for work orders. The First Cal Date field will display the date of the record's first recorded calibration. If this field is left blank and the Last Cal Date field is populated, the First Cal Date will be populated with the same date. The Last Cal Date field displays the date of the last recorded calibration. Upon tabbing off or saving, this will change the next calibration date in accordance with the calibration frequency selected. The Next Cal Date field displays the next scheduled calibration date for this instrument. This date will automatically update upon the passing of a calibration or if the last calibration date or calibration frequency is manually changed. The Keep on Schedule field may already contain a check mark if it was set at the system or company level. This setting will ensure that your calibration dates stay on schedule when they automatically roll after a passing calibration. For example, if this instrument were calibrated today and had an annual calibration frequency, then the next cal date would roll the date 1 year to the day. The same result would be achieved if the record was calibrated a few days early or a few days late. Thus, the frequency is kept on schedule. Under these circumstances, but without the Keep on Schedule box checked, the next cal date would always roll to the exact day the instrument was calibrated, effectively changing the calibration schedule over time. The Separate As Found, As Left Readings field may also already contain a check mark if it was set at the company or system level. Marking this box will allow users to record separate as found and as left input values when entering a calibration. The ability to document separate as found and as left inputs is useful when performing calibrations in which it is very difficult to reach the same nominal input value as stated on the item's master record for both the as found and as left tests. The Separate As Found As Left input setting provides the ability to capture the differences in inputs, expected outputs, accuracy information, and limits between test points used for the As Found test and the As Left test. Placing a check mark in the Approve By checkbox and saving will approve the record. Once your instrument record is approved, it's ready for calibration. If the instrument has been associated with a system or any loops, then that information will also be displayed in the Associated Loops and System box. If this is the case, then the system and/or loop records can be opened directly from this screen by double-clicking their IDs within the box. Next is the Calibration Points tab. To begin adding information to this tab, you must first click the Add Group button. This will bring up blank calibration specification fields and a blank grid. As you can see, this tab contains fields for the user to enter calibration information for the instrument, such as the number of calibration points, signal type, stated accuracy, input and output resolution, as well as input tolerance. This information is then used by the system to calculate high and low spec and control limits for the instrument's calibration. ProCal V5 allows you to create test point groups, which may help you organize this information, especially if the instrument requires a more complicated calibration. Not all instruments will require the use of multiple test point groups. However, an instrument like a multimeter may require that its high and low limits be calculated from multiple ranges, so the use of several different test point groups would be necessary. You may enter any group name that you choose. This field can be left blank, but if you are going to have multiple groups, it is recommended that it be filled in. The number of cal points field allows you to enter the number of calibration test points that will be taken for this calibration group. A maximum number of 999 test points can be entered for each group. Opening the test type field will show the test type packages that are installed. Test type packages refresh the screen to show new fields which capture data specific to more complex or simplified calibration procedures. Selection of the input and output type can be made from that field's drop-down list, which contains the signal types that have been entered through the list's menu. If the signal type needed is not yet on that list, you can add it by clicking the New button next to the field. ProCal V5 allows you to have separate input and output value resolutions. Therefore, once you have selected your signal type, you must then select your resolution, which will determine the number of decimal places that your ranges and values will assume. To select a different resolution, select it from the InRes or OutRes fields drop-down list. As you select different resolutions, you will notice that the in-low range and in-high range fields will adjust accordingly. The in-low range and in-high range fields are used to record the instrument's full input range. Any numeric value may be entered into each of these fields. Entering an instrument's input range is important if you plan to allow the system to auto-assign the instrument's input values into the calibration specifications grid. The out-low range and out-high range fields are used to record the instrument's full output range. As with the input ranges, any numeric value may be entered into each of these fields. If the instrument's stated accuracy uses percent of range in any way, it is important that you enter the correct output range for the device, since this is used in conjunction with the range accuracy percent to calculate the item's low and high limits. After entering the instrument's low and high input range, you may decide to utilize the input tolerance field. Entering an input tolerance on an item's master record allows you to establish minimum and maximum values for the set points that can be adjusted when the item is calibrated. For example, if you set the input tolerance to 1 on an instrument's master record, then when you enter the calibration record for that item, the input signal values will have to be within plus or minus 1 of each set point's nominal value to continue with entering the calibration. Within the correlation to output field, you will find 3 options: linear, manual, and square root. Linear will enforce that type of correlation between the instrument's input and output values. For example, if you select to enforce a linear correlation with input values of 4, 12, and 20, the corresponding output values will automatically be calculated by the system as 0, 50, and 100. If you select a square root correlation to output with the same input range and input values that were used in the example for the linear correlation, the system would calculate the output values to be 0, 70.71, and 100, respectively. With either linear or square root selected for the correlation to output, you will be restricted from modifying any of the output values in the grid unless you reset the correlation to output field to manual, which allows for manual modification of the output values. The stated accuracy field contains 5 options. The first is manual. With this stated accuracy selected, you must manually enter all input, output, and limit values into the grid. Percent of range will instruct the system to calculate the high and low limits from a percent of the instrument's full output range. To use this stated accuracy, you must fill in the out-low range and out-high range fields. Percent of reading will instruct the system to calculate the high and low limits from a percent of each test point's output value. Percent of reading range will instruct the system to use a combination of the range accuracy percent and the reading accuracy percent to calculate the high and low limits. To use this accuracy, you must fill out the out-low range and out-high range fields. Selecting plus minus will instruct the system to calculate the high and low limits for each test point as plus or minus a discrete value. If the control limits box is marked, then the high and low control limits columns will be seen on the grid. Selection of the % radio button allows you to enter a percentage value from which the control limits will be calculated. Control limits are calculated from the spec limits. If you select the plus minus radio button, then the field will use a discrete numeric value which will be used to calculate the control limits so that each low and high control limit value at each test point will be plus or minus the value entered into the control plus minus field. If you have decided not to use control limits, then it does not matter which radio button is selected or what value is shown in this field, because the system will not use it for anything and the high and low control limit columns will be removed from the grid. If you selected manual for the correlation to output field, then clicking the calculate button will display 6 different options. Auto assign inputs calculate linear outputs and limits. This option will fill in all of the input values, assign linear outputs, calculate the low and high spec points, and, if applicable, control limits. Auto assign inputs calculate square root outputs and limits. This option will fill in all of the input values, assign square root outputs, calculate the low and high spec points, and, if applicable, control limits. Calculate linear outputs and limits. This option will calculate the linear outputs and limits based on the inputs and stated accuracy. Calculate square root outputs and limits. This option will calculate the square root outputs and limits based on the inputs and stated accuracy. Auto assign inputs. This option will assign inputs based on the number of test points and the input range. Calculate limits. This option will calculate the limits based on the stated accuracy settings and the output values. Keep in mind that in order to utilize some of these functions, you must have entered data into all input and output range fields and/or the stated accuracy fields. If, after making modifications to the data in the calibration specifications grid, you decide to change back to the default selections shown in the gray section of the screen, you may do this by selecting the Restore Defaults button. Clicking the Restore Defaults button will present you with 4 options: Restore All, Restore Input Signals to Defaults, Restore Output Signals to Defaults, Restore Accuracies to Defaults. To add additional test point groups to an instrument record, click the Add Group button for every new group needed. This will add a new group below the previous one. To delete a test point group from the record, display the group to be deleted by using the Next Group and Previous Group buttons, then click the Delete Group button. This will remove the test point group entirely from the record. To change the order of the test point groups in a record, click the Move Group Up and Move Group Down buttons. Additional methods for adding new test point groups to the record are located in the Edit menu. Copy Current Test Point Group will create a new group as a copy of the currently displayed group. This feature is helpful in saving time spent performing repetitive data entry of similar groups of test points and similar ranges. Load Test Point Group from Item opens a screen for selecting a test point group from another item in the current company. The screen opens with no item selected. First, select an item type. Then, select an item ID. Select the Load Specs button to bring in a read-only view of all test point groups available on this item. Select the OK button to add the specs to the record. This tab allows you to record additional information about the instrument, such as its location information, responsible technician, P&ID info, and warranty expiration date. This tab also contains 3 sets of fields that are very important if you are using ProCal V5's alert system. These are the Failed Cal Alert main type, failure alerts due a number of days after event, the Found Out of Cal Alert main type, Found Out of Cal Alerts due a number of days after event, and the Notification Groups fields. The Failed Cal Alert main type is the maintenance type that is automatically applied to an alert maintenance request that is generated as a result of a failed calibration. This maintenance request will then appear in the reminder screen under the Alert section until further action has been taken. Entering in a numeric value into the Failure Alerts Due a number of days after event field enables the system to automatically calculate a due date for the alert priority maintenance request based upon the date that the actual failure event took place. You do have the option of leaving this field blank, which would result in the date required field on the maintenance request defaulting to the same date that the failure event occurred. The found out of cal alert main type works in the same way except for the fact that the instrument does not have to actually fail. It just has to have had at least one found as value that was outside of its low or high spec limit. Once again, this maintenance request record will then appear in the reminder screen under the alert section until further action has been taken. Entering a numeric value into the found out of cal alerts due a number of days after event field enables the system to automatically calculate a due date for the alert priority maintenance request based upon the date that the found out of calibration event took place. Again, you do have the option of leaving this field blank, which would result in the date required field on the maintenance request defaulting to the same date that the failure event occurred. The two fields included in the notification group section are used to determine the user group that should be notified when a failure or found out of calibration event occurs. Each of these fields contains a drop-down list with all user groups that have been entered into the database. One user group may be selected for each field to allow notifications to automatically be sent to those groups' members when the alert event occurs. Leaving either or both of these fields blank will result in no failure or found out of cal notifications being sent out to any system users. There are three compliance report fields on this tab: the as found failure compliance report type, the failed calibration compliance report type, and the late calibration compliance report type. These fields are used to determine which compliance reports will be generated for the following calibrated related events: an as found failure, an as left failure or failed calibration, and a late calibration. Each of these fields contains a drop-down menu listing all compliance report types currently defined within the company. The compliance report type selected in these fields will be auto-generated by the system upon the finalization of a calibration event that triggers one of these settings. You can also set the vendors which sell or service this instrument. To do this, highlight the vendor and click the appropriate arrow button between the two list boxes. The User-Defined tab contains all user-defined fields that have been set up for the instrument record. The PM Info tab may be used to add planned maintenance records to the instrument. To add a new planned maintenance record, click the Add New PM button. This will open the planned maintenance screen, enabling you to enter a new record. All planned maintenance record for the instrument will be listed in the planned maintenance assigned to this instrument section of the tab. To view the planned maintenance record listed, highlight it and click the View Selected PM Record button. The Notes tab is used to enter and view notes for the instrument record. To enter a new note, click the Add a Note button. Type your note into the field provided and click the Save Record button. As new notes are added, they will be inserted at the top of those listed. As the record acquires multiple notes, you may change their order by clicking the Sort Ascending Descending button. The note field is limited to 1,996 characters for each note. If the Delete Notes option is enabled on the company record, there may be an option to delete notes based on the group rights. The Documents and Reports tab is used to associate one or more documents with the instrument record and also to override default reports that may have been set on the System Options and Defaults or Company Record screens. The document IDs of all document records in the selected company will appear in the Available Documents box. To assign documents to the record, highlight them and click the Assign Selected Documents button. To unassign documents, highlight them and click the Unassign Selected Documents button, or to disassociate all documents from the record at once, click the Unassign All Documents button. The Master Report and Worksheet Report override fields allow you to choose from all reports in the system that are compatible with the Master Instrument Record screen, while all the reports on the Calibration Report override drop-down list are those that are compatible with the calibration screen. To use the default reports selected in the System Options or Company Record screens, leave these fields blank. To use a different report for any of the report types shown, just select the desired report's name from that field's drop-down list. Once report overrides have been established, they will be used every time you preview or print those reports directly from the master instrument record they've been applied to. This tab is used to apply approval policies to the record and to any calibrations done for that record. If you have entered approval policies into the current company, then all active policies will appear on the drop-down list for both the new approval policy and calibration approval policy fields. When you select an approval policy for the new approval policy field and hit the Tab key, the body of the screen will refresh to show an originator checkbox with your name next to it, in addition to all signatures required for the policy. Once you check the Changes Complete checkbox and save the record, the routing of the approval policy signatures will become active. When an approval policy has been applied to a record, then all signatures in that policy must be completed before the final approval can be done. Selection of a policy in the Calibration Approval Policy field will apply the selected policy to the calibration screen every time a new calibration record is entered for the instrument. The Approvals tab on the calibration screen works in the same way as it does on the instrument screen. The Materials tab is where materials can be added to master records. This screen is only available if the user has purchased the Parts and Inventory module. And that's it. Your instrument record is complete, approved, and ready for calibration. At any time, you may view a chronological list of events that occurred for an item over a specified date range. To do this, open an instrument record, then select Show Events from the File menu. This will open the event history screen for the instrument whose record is currently opened. To use this screen, place check marks in the boxes for all event types you would like to see and enter a date range using the start date and end date fields. Once you have made your selections and entered your date range, you may click the refresh button to generate the list of events that occurred for that instrument on the specified dates. In order for some event types to be captured, the audit trail must be turned on for the instruments. Selecting Show History opens up an audit trail of the instrument record that can be exported to Excel. Selecting Enter Calibration Record from the File menu will launch the calibration screen and start a new calibration for that master record. Selecting Delete Record from the File menu will allow you to delete the instrument record. If the instrument is a component of any loop records, it will have to be removed from the loop before the record can be deleted. If the instrument is a lead component on a system record, the record will not be able to be deleted. If you do not have access to delete instrument records, this option will be grayed out and not available to you. And that's all there is to it. Now you know all about master instrument records in ProCal V5.